episode 4 of the Thought About It podcast, talking about how to become ridiculously more creative by Viktoria Verde. Right off the bat, this article what did it do to me? This is a topic that I don't know if you can influence this with an article. I don't know if you could influence this by advice. I don't know if you could influence this by anything other than something that's not talked about by basic science. And right off the bat, if you're reading this article, you're going to notice that it's suggesting 15 strategies and 5 creativity tests to practical science-backed ways of being creative. Is it just me, or does that make me not creative when I read it? I mean, the whole point of creativity is that it's a way to describe people who are exceptional. Creativity is kind of turned into something that people want to have themselves defined as on a resume now. That it's become something that companies, like top companies, are looking for in candidates. And this is obviously in roles where you're not performing tasks that resemble like a assembly line, essentially. Because what's the creativity there? The creativity really comes in play when you're starting to get into roles where you need to come up with ideas, but ideas that are relevant, ideas that make sense. And number one, creativity is kind of a weird subject because some people like me will argue sometimes the things that people are looking for is not creativity, but instead somebody that's very educated. Somebody that's very educated is able to come up with ideas that are relevant. They're not really ideas. The word ideas kind of rubs me the wrong way as somebody who's come up with a lot of ideas and since educated quite well in traditional education and has realized that ideas are kind of worth nothing. They're worth a lot, but even there, I've read articles on VC funds that talk about the real return to entrepreneurs and stuff like that after they sell so much funding in their company. It starts to look like a wage. It's kind of a weird example, but it kind of brings things back to earth. Is a good example there. Like, ideas are something that are limited in what they provide. And they're definitely limited in how much they bring you in terms of like money and success. Like, really implementing something for a specific situation that needs an idea, albeit that the idea is not original, is arguably way more valuable than having an original idea. An original idea that solves a huge problem that nobody's been able to solve before. I don't know if we're talking about something in an article there. I think a company that's looking for a person to have that on their resume and looking for the person who's going to come up with that idea, I think they're better off looking at what the person's saying and looking at the merits of what that person's talking about and saying about the world, because that has more of an indicator about whether or not they're going to be successful. I don't know if you would call that creativity, but more like that person is, again, I hate the word genius and things like that. It's so misleading, and it seems so motivating to some people, but words like genius, creativity, ideas, things like that, they can mislead people. Now, this isn't to demotivate. This is actually the opposite. It's saying that an article that's teaching you about science-backed ways to be creative, I think that we need to talk about something else. Is that creativity is an outcome. I've mentioned that. It's how you would define a person that is exceptional. Creativity is what you get when you figured things out for yourself and you're able to come up with ideas consistently because you're in a zone. You're locked in. There's many ways to say it. You know? How are you going to influence that by reading 15 science-backed ideas or 15 tips? We all know the blogs, 15 tips for doing this. Creativity is attractive because it's one of those ideas that you can't influence. And that's why I think that companies are looking for it. A company like Apple wants somebody who's highly creative because it shows that they've been doing all the work needed. They're educated. They've set up their life in a certain way. They've learned about themselves. That's different for everybody. Like, how is that the same? And creativity, what does that even mean for you? And what does that mean for me? I can tell you, I know the feeling that I get when I would define myself as creative. And that's a feeling that I try to get on a daily basis, but it's very much something that I live my day to achieve, but not really achieve to stay there. One way that works for me is by writing and talking. And I know for a fact that this is not the same for other people because I've talked about this with other people. And it has a completely different effect on people. Is somebody might say they love writing and talking because they learn from it. When I write and talk, I'm able to come up with ideas, but part of that is because I try to be logical when I talk and when I write. I'm explaining it to myself. If I was to think about it and break it down a little bit, when I'm explaining it to myself and I'm trying to reason, I'm finding flaws in my own argument. Not always arguing, but I'm trying to not justify, but I'm trying to make sense of something. And obviously understanding something very well is going to put you in that zone of creativity. If that is the type of person you are. Because when I was reading this article, I really started to think of that. I started going against the idea of science-backed. We'll get into that in a little bit. But nearing the end of the article, I really started to think a lot of the stuff that I'm writing is about a certain feeling that I get. I wouldn't even describe it as motivation, but it's kind of that. As soon as I say motivation, gone goes that feeling. Creativity to me is like that. When I give myself the time on a certain day, I might be feeling tired. When I'm tired, what do I need to do to get in the zone? When I'm feeling too busy, what do I have to do to get in the zone? When I feel like I don't have any ideas, I'm not creative. What do I have to do to get in the zone? See, even for me in different situations, I have to do something different to be what you would call creative. Because creativity does have definitions. We know what it looks like. This person is coming up with ideas that are relevant, that make sense, that if you said that at the boardroom table, everybody's saying, all right, let's go with that, or let's look into that. That's an outcome. That's the outcome. And we all want to be there. And we all want to hire that person. Because this guy has an idea. That's being creative. You can break that down 50 ways to define that precisely. Now, if I was to say, try to become that, well, does that person do that consistently? Number one. So being consistently creative, that's the desired goal of some article like this. To be able to engineer creativity. And in this article, there is a direct mention of that. Engineering flow. I have the papers. Can you engineer flow? Because even on an individual basis, it would be describing to that person what? See, it's very much a personal decision. Because I don't know if you could tell anybody anything to make them creative. So I'm not doubting, I'm definitely not going against creativity being important. That's very far from the point of this article, and also far from even a discussion. You want to be that person at the boardroom table. Who doesn't? Because I've already talked about, to me, creativity is not coming up with an original idea. That goes against what's said in this article. There's a strong emphasis on originality that I would go against. To me, I think that if you were to look closer at creativity, and this is a relevant conversation because there is a section that talks about and defines creativity. It's being able to apply something completely normal, something that we knew 5 years ago. This is called innovation. It's taking an idea that's already been used and dropping it in this context. You seem like a genius. How did you come up with that? If you get that answer because you're working in a good place that admits that and will tell you that, because number one, I don't know why a workplace would ever not say that if it was true. But if you get that answer, that's creativity. These are exceptional people. But these are people who can problem solve just about anything. I mean, when you're talking about creativity, you're really coming up with the definition of a person that probably doesn't even want to work for you if you hire them for that. If you were to label that and talk about that, it's highly demotivating. I would probably take the check, and I don't want to be the person who's like, oh, you want to hire me with a big check, and I don't want to work there for. If you pay, I work. I'm that kind of person. I'm not the person that tries to make the Silicon Valley statement, But creativity, a big thing that I'm struggling with to understand after reading this article How to Become More Creative is the title. Subtitle: A practical science-backed guide with 15 strategies and 5 creativity tests. What? Creativity tests. I really wanted to bring this reading to people's attention with the tone that I'm using about talking about it, and see if I'm the only one that gets completely demotivated when I read this. And I know this is worth talking about because I know there's something wrong here. Because I know that we all understand what creativity is. I think that everybody has been creative. Who are we to say that somebody hasn't been creative? So this article, under that view, how do you be creative all the time? There's a interesting discussion. I don't know if science-backed anything is going to get you there, because it more so sounds like a personal conversation and understanding what works for a certain person. Because a really tough thing is we understand what creativity is. But if you want to manufacture this thing we call creativity, is it just me, or does that sound like there's a lot wrong there? And this idea of not being able to manufacture creativity is a very relevant subject when we're in a world that's being engineered. There's a huge desire to engineer. There's a huge desire to automate via free thought computation or ideas or brains that are computerized, called AI. Or anything to do with engineering. Because I'm not sold that AI can do it by itself. Because the one thing that the creative person can do that the AI can't do, Optimus, with the AI chip in, with every piece of information in the world, is come up with that idea that makes a person say that. That idea in this context is understanding something that cannot be computed up there. And it feels like the idea that would be the one that contradicts what that robot is saying. I mean, I'm sitting down right here. I'm thinking of a table where Optimus is sitting there. And Optimus doesn't stop talking. Or it's saying all the right things. This thing called the mind, though, creativity, is just, shut it. Because you have a simple idea, a simple solution to the problem. It's completely detached from what the person is asking. Because they want to solve that. You know the outcome that they want. They want to increase revenue. I don't know what you say to that. That's a very boring question. And that ties into part of what drives me. It's hard for me to be creative if we're talking about things and not breaking them down. It's why writing and talking works really well for me to be creative as a person, because I'm able to break things down. Like, what is revenue? That's kind of an annoying way to go about a meeting, is it not? It's also the misleading part about being creative is that people start doing that. Like, no, revenue is quite simple to think of. We know what we're selling. We're not going to have this theoretical conversation, not even on a podcast. I'm not going to start rumbling on about this because it's showing exactly what's annoying about talks about creativity and originality and things like that. You know, because it takes an education to understand how to make money. And if not, you already understand the how to stay focused. You have customers, they have needs. You know how to build stuff that they need. Because most likely, which ties into writing that I've done online on Medium, is that you are a customer yourself and you're aware of what you would want. And you're able to build for that. And therefore, you build really well for other people using the idea of an app. Why would you be building features for an app that you do not use? Or that you in no way became a user of that app by your own needs. You don't even know why somebody started using it. You didn't have that deeper connection to that piece of software. See, right here, I'm able to connect with that idea. See, the ideas start flowing. To me, that's creativity. Now, 10 strategies, 15 strategies for coming up with creativity. Some of these are personal, and I would not suggest anybody do them at work. Because it really sounds like a person needs to do work before they get to work. I might get into that. But simple titles, you can almost, I'm talking like this because you can almost guess. You can almost guess what these strategies are saying. And I'm trying to think of if there's a single person who reads this and says, moving your body, strategy 11. Who read this, moved their body, and then got an idea? Now, when I stretch, I could become creative. But is it just me, or is it when I'm reading this, I'm feeling detached from any of those creative juices that would be flowing? But this sounds like to me is somebody needs an answer. This article mentions structure and that it's somebody that could use this. It mentions this upwards to the start of the article. And it mentions that we are so used to being structured in our day to day that it's difficult to be creative. Now, I kind of disagree with that because I found that when I am structured, I'm actually more creative. Because that seems like a little simplistic of a view. You are doing things at school. If you're a student, you know how some people see what you do. You're not even thinking about it though. You know that to finish that assignment, you better motivate yourself because finishing an assignment sucks. It's difficult. And you're usually out of time. Okay, you usually don't have time. And how many tools and tips and tricks have you created while you were studying that got you through the assignment? You never used that strategy ever again. The second that you talked about it with anybody, you're immediately regretting that you tried to lend advice for something that made you motivated or creative or got you in the flow at that moment. That feeling, I'm kind of hoping everybody has that. If not, I'm the guy who spews out advice on those, not advice. Wow, that sounds so weird. I'm the guy who talks about that, like, I finished the assignment by doing this. And everybody's like, oh, because they're already on their thing. They're already on their idea of how to finish the assignment. I'm on Notion today. I'm not subscribing to that software within a month. I can tell you that. Things like that have not stuck around. There's certain things that I've done during my education that I used for a little bit. I thought it was genius and then it never worked out. It never stayed. Some maps obviously stick around, but those are the ones that target the core things that have made me creative and that have worked. Writing, Obsidian, that app has made me very creative because it's me that likes to write things out. But that wasn't the full answer because I've even stopped using that app at some point. At some point, I exhausted that need to write something out. I then needed to start talking. Like the act of making a podcast sort of is like that. You're not always able to finish an episode. If you're doing a solo podcast, I have a podcast called Point 5 Podcast on every channel there is online. And it's produced with guests. And this show is currently on episode 9 and up to episode 7 is already released if you guys want to check it out. But that one's very different because it's a conversation with somebody else. When that creativity or that lock-in that you have expires, you've got another person there. You've got a conversation. Conversation doesn't just stay in one direction. And even while I'm talking, me exhausting a certain idea while I'm talking is an example of that. I go on to the other topic or whatever is interesting to me at that moment. I'm breaking this down. This is very meta. Okay? I'm talking about the talk. But creativity flows to where an episode can always finish sometimes. Like, it doesn't flow perfectly. It doesn't always come. Sometimes you're not creative. And while I'm making a podcast, I don't know if reading a single one of these points would allow me to become more creative or problem solve. And what I rely on while I'm making a podcast like this is things that I've learned about myself to get me ideas. I fumble around with papers. An idea sparks. I talk things through. I get comfortable with pauses. But these are lessons that I've learned. These are things that I've learned about myself. And it's more of a reflection of talent. And most people would call talent an education or experience, because experience and education are usually in argument for which one's more important. So, an education or talent that you have. An interesting discussion would be, is creativity, instead of what this article has provided as a definition, which is supported by the citations that they use, and they have used quite a few citations if you'd like to take a look at their article. That name of the article is in the title of the episode. To define creativity, some might define creativity as simply being an experienced or educated individual, or having a mix of those might make you even more creative. Might be an umbrella term in there. Or it might be an umbrella term that defines education, motivation, experience. All of these qualities wrapped under this term called creativity. Because is everything that a workplace is looking for really just a creative person? Now, that would mean that your definition of creativity, the most simplistic one that doesn't encapsulate all these confounding aspects of it, include that the idea is relevant. Some people take on the idea of creativity as you're able to come up with something original. I don't know if every workplace is looking for that, because they do ask for creativity. They're looking for people who are creative. I know that's not the only thing that they're looking for, though. So maybe you think that being creative is just coming up with something original. And it's hard to say if just coming up with something original, like art, somebody's gonna enjoy that out there, I'm sure. It's just difficult to find those people. So it's a good argument for saying, like, careful with saying that something's not valuable. But demand is a little bit easier to test sometimes. Like, if it takes 1 million people to find one, then you're getting into technicals. Back on if we can influence creativity, though. And the only way I can do that is really thinking about myself at my most creative times. Some creativity is like an accident. I think a lot of people would agree with that. A lot of certain levels of creativity are an accident, and we would only call it creative when we look back and say, like, wow. If somebody was to really take every aspect into consideration and say that was that's creative. But we got there by accident. So there's good debate there. And if something comes by accident like that, if creativity comes by accident, then who are we to create strategies for becoming creative? That gets to a weird conversation, does it not? Like, that's harder science than they've provided here for influencing that. Now, like, that's a subject I don't even want to talk about because that starts manipulating somebody's like brain or who knows what. And even if you were to educate a person, it starts to seem a little strange. It seems like a very personal area to where ideally we should be keeping this as personal and leave this up to individuality of human beings. But the reality is that a lot of things are being programmed today. And a lot of things that some people would describe as us have been and will be put into a robot or a computer. Now, my stance on creativity is that you will most likely not be able to create that. No matter how hard you try, and the reason why is a little tough. And it's tough because if you were to tell an engineer, I can generate creativity. Look at if you were completely serious and there's no technicalities to that, if you're able to generate creativity, you would be beyond rich. Popular, interesting, of relevance to absolutely everyone that is important in the world. They would be looking to you like I am looking at the monitor right now. Tell me how. Because creativity being recreated or engineered hits two categories. Number one, people who want to do it. And number two, people who are very concerned that that would be done. I'm of the category of people who would be concerned that it would be done. Because you then start to have to debate what is creativity. Because that opens the door to somebody saying, I can engineer creativity. Well, that's not creative. What I mean by that is that you're saying, like, how do you define that? How do you define that? How are you going to define, like, the robot is creative, but I don't like reading their stuff as it is. That art that Elon Musk posts on X, I don't get interested by it. There's a certain level of creativity in that, though, which is an interesting little topic because I can use it as an idea. Like when I see those, we all know them. We all know the images. There are those moving images. And then what it turns into is robots and things like that. But for now, it's images. And it's able to generate things that are cool. They get a little tiring after a while. It'll probably figure out how to stop doing that. But creativity being engineered, It's a strange topic. Because if you can engineer creativity, well, creativity is very individual. Like, it's also not mutually exclusive. The robot can be creative. I can be creative too. So when somebody's not creative, they're essentially taking something from a book. Is that even true? They're applying stuff to situations that have been clearly defined. In this situation, X, you do Y. That hits that's not really talking about creativity correctly though, because that would mean it's a race. That would mean that there's like limited. It's a race to find that last thing that hasn't been applied. Every situation is different, number one. Every day, new day. New situations that have never happened. The combinations have never been there before. So, good luck programming that. Good luck having a robot doing that. It's coming up with how many ideas on how to solve today's problem. How much time would it take to listen to that thing? If it's sitting here and it's looking at you dead in the face and it's saying, do this, aren't you always going to use that just for ideas? Part of your process? Because if you lacked creativity, you would. Somebody who lacks creativity is taking things that other people are telling them and they are just doing it. They're applying things, they're reading things, and they're applying it. Opening a new Subway. The formula is there. You sprinkle money into it and you open it up. Where is the creativity in that? Well, there is. Because how many employees at the Subway are depressed? How many employees at the it doesn't have to be a wild thing. To be able to achieve simple standards in a restaurant like Subway restaurant, to be able to achieve simple standards in a fast food chain at the till at Subway, you have to be creative. You need to be creative because people are different today than they were yesterday. The thing that you say today can't be the same thing that you would say in a different place in a different time. The general talk that worked in Sinatra time in New York does not work in a place like California in 2026 or in Texas in 2026. We don't like the same thing. What do we call that difference? See, that's changing culture. That's all. That's tons. Culture and new lessons, sure, but that kind of touches on creativity a little bit. Now let's get back to the point of the article. generating creativity, science backed ways. You're the person at Subway who needs to come up with a creative anything to have me not miserable when I'm ordering my sandwich because your location stinks and you know that, and your creativity in as simple as having a simple conversation with me can make me not care about the stink so much. My opinion is that you can't follow a single suggestion that somebody gives you because I think that the simple giving of advice, I just don't think you can, I don't think you can influence creativity. Some things that the article mentions that is true. Flow state. I 100% agree that there is a flow state. That would be a definition of a person that we're observing that is exceptional. Another thing that I agree with is what they would be trying to get at least in part, by saying engineering creativity. I believe you can do something like that for yourself. And I believe that you wouldn't be defining it as creative, but instead you're able to focus. But right there, I almost lose myself because the topic is so big. I think creativity encapsulates intelligence, which is interesting because when you talk about intelligence in psychology courses, I heard the word creativity come up a lot. And it would be interesting if we found that intelligence and creativity are synonymous, if we haven't already found that. Why that's important is because it would mean that it's something that's made up of everything that you've done. It is the sum of what you are after doing everything that you've done. Your decisions, your education, how much you focused in your education, what you did with your education, how well you keep your mood good, how well you are able to motivate yourself or get in a certain level of comfort to produce. That would influence creativity. Simple tricks that they mention, like sleep on it, there's some validity in that. But again, for everybody, because I've found staying awake, if I'm like alone, is actually a better way. I need to sleep on it if a lot of people are around, and it's usually just to delay until I can get quiet. So they try to define creativity. I suggest creativity is not easily defined. When they say what actually happens in a creative brain, and they go into discussion on that, I'm suspicious of that. After how wide this conversation on creativity is, and questioning what is creativity, I highly doubt that we understand that. But I'm almost operating under the assumption here that we do. And I do that because I want to talk about these strategies that you can follow something and become creative. I would hope that other people are not thinking that it's something that you can just turn on and turn off. Because I feel like somebody who is creative in a more dynamic way, flexible way, would make other people not seem creative. Because it's not like, oh, you meet the bar of creativity. It's a relative thing. And creativity, obviously, you need to push through things that other people wouldn't. Like creativity, you clearly spent time doing something that other people are not doing. How to become ridiculously more creative is the title of the article. A practical science backed guide with 15 strategies and 5 creativity tests. How does creativity test sound? How does creativity test sound to you right now? It sounds kind of yuck to me. But it kind of makes sense with the intelligence. Because we test intelligence and that kind of adds up. Are we able to engineer intelligence? That's interesting. That's actually very interesting. A very interesting topic. And I know it's of relevance because intelligence is something that we study in psychology. And it's something that we don't fully understand. We have ways of determining on a relative basis who is better to sit in a certain classroom and do well. We also have ways of hiring, etc., etc. But when you get to the market, intelligence, there's factors, but when people are of similar education, where's the intelligence? Because not all those people, see right there, they're intelligent. But are they creative? So intelligence and creativity, I wouldn't say they're synonymous. Doesn't sit right with me. Creativity sounds like a adjective that we would add on top of intelligence. It's like a sprinkle. You all have the same education. You're all intelligent. You built the tools to be able to get that education. We're not dumb. Unless you like, we're not talking about cheats. Okay? You found a way to get through it. If you fake it and you didn't like outright cheat, if you fake it, you know it still went in your brain. Okay? Still built a strategy. You're intelligent. Okay? I'm not here to tell somebody that they're not intelligent because of what I'm not going to make that argument. But in not making that argument, creativity sounds like a sprinkle on top of intelligence, or that creativity is something that you need and that then you would need to meet the criteria of intelligence. Who knows? But you see how these things start to like play off of one another. It's like creativity is a thing that you cannot influence. Because it feels like the thing that would be the modern school. Like we're going to start teaching people how to become creative. That sounds really cringe. And when things get cringy, I get suspicious. Because usually if something's cringy like that, it starts to not add up on paper. And if you've like if you've read a lot and if you've done a lot of work in college, university, you know that's usually true. Like if you're not on following some chain of logic, it's very strange. If it sounds very cringy, and obviously your definition of cringe is not things that are factual. Like for me, things that are cringe are things that are just completely detached. It's an offensive idea. That's what I would say instead of cringe, because cringe is used by younger people to say a different thing. Now, saying that you can engineer creativity is an offensive idea. I think it's offensive because who's actually able to do that? It's a bad argument, right? How about I think creativity is offensive to engineer creativity is offensive. I think engineering creativity is offensive because it's the aspect of intelligence that you can't engineer, can't teach it. It's what somebody does when they go home. It's the decisions that they make when they step out of work, they step out of school. It's the things that they think about. But it's also the things I don't think about. The slack off. The person who didn't do anything their whole life can bet on creativity being there. Because that person working that role who has that education, see, right when I start talking about this, it starts to make sense. Creativity is different from intelligence. The highly intelligent person who doesn't have a lot of creativity, Mr. did not pay attention in school, has a chance against them. Equal hires in some situations. Sometimes, obviously, this one's a little bit lower because that one's making statements and hard. But this person has a job. This person provides an essential role. All those people would protect that person as well. Because obviously somebody who would want to hurt that would be a big problem. Somebody who is highly educated, which means credentials. Credentials are very important. Nobody's denying that. We usually want our officials not so much because that's politics. That comes down to support. Same thing, but different. Give me a pass on that one. People in the top of the companies, okay? People who are making your medicine. Yeah, let's hope that they have degrees. They should be following rules. They should know the rules, regulations, standards. You see what I mean? Creativity, Mr. Creativity over here, no education. Yeah, let's take a pass on that one for that role. Mr. Creativity not working there and that person's only running it, do you think that company's going to survive? Could be an argument that they'll survive. That person works at another place and that place, the competitor doesn't have it. I say this one's better, right? It's a pretty simple argument. Now, what I'm saying is that to engineer creativity like that, me saying that that's offensive, is because number one, something that hurts that person is probably not correct. Doesn't seem right to me. But that's personal. This person has something that that person doesn't have. Always. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The thing that this person is able to do that that person's not able to do, the person with the high degree, maybe this person's better at that. What's the difference? Can the person with the degree engineer that? I don't think the person with the degree's mind or time or amount of money in a bank account or training or personal desires allows them to do what this person does over here, Mr. Slackoff. Not because they can't do it, but because it's almost painful or wrong. And it maybe would lead to a bad outcome for that person. For Mr. Slackoff, that's just what he does. But Mr. Slackoff's problem is that he's highly creative, has no degree. He's got great ideas. He's even figured out how to find the relevant ones, but he's not too good at that. That's where the subject of creativity requires an understanding of creative but the right things. That requires an education. Mr. Slackoff, see your local college or university. It's a fantastic idea. I went back, and that is something that is very valuable for you. And your skill, see, we're getting onto something here, ladies and gentlemen. We already know that if Mr. Slackoff goes to school, becomes a 4.33 and aces that, you know what I say next? He's rich. He's rich, he's rich, he's rich, and you know why. This guy can solve any problem on the street because he came from the street. No. He didn't come from the street. This guy had nothing to the point that he can solve any problem. That's just a byproduct, though. The guy's creative, didn't get focused in school, was not excited by it. These are some of the things that we see in creative people. You want to engineer that? You want to study that? Why are you studying that? Because we can understand that person better. Does it help us though? The value of creativity is very different from engineering creativity. This article is not doing that. It's not protecting this person. Creativity needs to be talked about in tangent with intelligence metrics, intelligence testing, and insert into conversation in schools, because this person needs to be best friends with the people who are educating so that this person can teach them and they can teach him. Without that in our system, this person is isolated from that person. We have gotten better at this as people. We know this right when I talk about this. It's not that we're less judgmental. It's that we don't have time to not understand this person. Mr. Slackoff. Okay? The guy's online. He's posting. But he might not have a top account. He might not have a top account because Mr. Slackoff doesn't know how to understand the man. He doesn't understand how to build something. I almost think of a person who's sitting at home doing things that are not PG. Okay, that's not the person I'm talking about. Could be that person too. But I'm not advocating to be that. I don't think that any consumables or anything like that is going to make you Mr. Slackoff. If anything, it's actually worse. All right. You do that because you think it's going to. No. You misunderstood what's making me go. All right. I'm not Mr. Slackoff. but you're misunderstanding what makes me go. I don't consume something to go. I drink coffee, okay? I drink coffee because it gets me going. That doesn't make me creative, though. That doesn't make me creative. I couldn't define what makes me creative because as soon as I do it, number one, I'm questioning, am I even creative? Like on a relative basis? No. Maybe. But the more important point there is as soon as I'm questioning that and I'm reading strategies, if you want to be creative, how about, I don't want to say don't read this article because it's super disrespectful and it's actually not true. This is a great article for a workplace or a person that's very structured to be able to understand the importance of creativity and understanding Mr. Slackoff. You want to become that? These are some of the things that you've got to wrestle with. Do I think that reading this and doing these things is going to make you creative? That's going to turn you into Mr. Slackoff? Number one, I don't think it's true because a lot of these, I don't think that they hit right. And that might show individuality. That might show that I only agree with a couple of these. I only see that a couple of these might do it. But that's because these work for me. You might argue and say 15 points. That's enough to get most people creative. I wouldn't follow a single one. I wouldn't follow a single one because I don't think that you can engineer that. This sounds like somebody needs an answer and somebody needs to target people who think that creativity, by asking for it at your organization, you forgot or you never learned the reason why that was written as a thing that you're looking for at a company. It is a outcome that is observed. It is not able to be taught. It is not able to be sought specifically. That actually sounds right. I almost want to argue it because it sounds hard. It sounds like a big statement. I don't think you can be creative if you're thinking about being creative. How are you in the flow while also saying, I want to be creative? How? So deep down, to engineer flow, word by word mentioned in this article, to engineer flow. Number one, random. There's an aspect of it that's random. We all know that there can be a lot of structure, but it is random. If that little tiny piece that's missing up there when you're in the flow, you still need that perfect thing to say at that perfect time. I mean, that's one example. You remember something or come up with the perfect argument on the perfect live paper in a class. You're sitting there at a desk writing. That idea doesn't slip into your mind the right way, but when it does, boom, you're inking that page to flawless. You want to tell me you can engineer that? Because you can engineer the structured part. The creative part, if you think of how to deliver that paper the right way, does that paper require any creativity is my question. Because I don't know if it does. So one of the bigger problems I have about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're dealing with a subject that we barely know about. People are asking for it, and because people are asking for it on resumes or job postings, or that we use this to define intelligence because it's becoming a heavy word now for determining intelligence by anybody worth their salt, let's say. If you're highly creative, you're intelligent. I like that example. That example that I was talking about, there's intelligent people and just highly creative people. And then there's people who are both. I think that those people who are both are people who are billionaires. Mr. Slackoff meets high education and also hits luck and several other factors. Though I would say those three are huge. Luck, good luck influencing that. Your education and creativity help, but luck is everything outside of what you're able to control in this example. No matter how much you want to determine your outcome, there's always a probability there. But yeah, I don't think you can. I honestly read the title of this and I was already stuck there. How to become ridiculously more creative. Good luck. Good luck, because I think that if you were to do it and you haven't figured out what gets you going and you're highly structured, that it's going to be quite destructive. I don't know if anybody's like that. But those people who want to influence that in their work so that you're creative more often, go take a hike. Leave that up to the people who have failed. Mr. Slackoff has gone off breadcrumbs for ideas for the last 20 years. He hasn't had a fact to go off that has been relevant or impressive for that long. The guy knows how to solve things off shapes at this point. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to leave that there. He knows how to solve it off shapes. That's creativity. Different